Hi everyone, my name is Prasanna Kariyawansa. I'm a program educator with the IWK's Charming from Care team. And I'm here with my colleague Holly Murphy, and I'm excited to present to you on the topic of resiliency and wellness in uncertain times.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Murphy, the Advanced Practice Leader with Trauma-Informed Care at the IWK Health Center. First, we'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We would like to acknowledge this as we individually and collectively work together as systems towards truth and reconciliation, and we want to acknowledge we are all treaty people. Today, this session is a partnership between the IWK Health Center and the Department of Education and Early Childhood and Development. We really want to take the time today to think about how we're all coping, how we're all adapting, how we're all resilient, and how we all deal with stress. And hopefully this can kind of help us through the upcoming weeks and months. So this session is being taped. Today you may be joining us from your home, doing it individually, with others, so please find a comfortable space, whatever that is for you. We're all learners today, so there may be new information to you, or it may be information that you already know, but we hope that it is useful to you and that you can take something away from today. Reflect on your supports. So today throughout the presentation, we will be talking about stress. So thinking about who are those supportive people in your life that you can connect with afterwards if you need to connect with, whether it's to get support, support for yourself, for your family, for an idea that you have. So thinking about those supports throughout the presentation. And please take a break whenever you need to. So we are doing this from home, so you can stop us, pause us at any time, and please feel free to do that. Today our learning objectives are really going to be looking at a couple of things. So we're going to be looking at 6 psychological factors of health. We're going to be looking at creating a personal resiliency plan, and this may be looking at it from the perspective of just reflecting on what is going well for you now, what are you doing, what you hope to do, or it may be actually concretely writing it down on a piece of paper, and we do have resources to support to do that as well. And the third objective is to learn considerations for daily practice. So we'll actually be taking you through some ways that you can do this in your day-to-day lives, kind of looking at stress, how you cope and adapt, and some things that may help you. So we love this slide because it really does ring true. Being a caregiver is easy, said no one ever, right? So we all know this from being parents and caregivers, that it isn't easy. It isn't easy at the best of times. And with our current situations, with the pandemic, with multiple mass tragedies in our province, our own personal and family circumstances that may be going on, it is hard. So we have to really acknowledge that. Acknowledge that being a caregiver is hard sometimes in all of our different roles, and especially now with the pandemic. So we're really asking and thinking about, we think about maybe that trip that we want to go on, that we're on the airline, and they say, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? So we really have to do that in order to help anyone else. So it applies in this context too. So we're thinking about how do we take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And it's really important because we want to do the best job we can taking care of our children, our youth, our family, our friends. But in order to do that, we really have to be taking care of ourselves. The other piece that we really need to be thinking about is learning to accept uncertainty. Because in this time of uncertainty, we don't have a lot of things that are really concrete, that are predictable, that we know that are always coming. So we really have to kind of learn to accept that. We're all in this together. We're all human. We all are in this stressful time, this stressful situation. And accepting that creates kind of a commonality, a humanity, saying that we're all in this together and we will get through it and we'll find some ways to do that. So when we think of stressors that we have in our lives, we often try to think of it in ways that are helpful. So thinking about the stressor we might have, is that in our control to change? So it may be in our control to change, and if it is, that might be hard work. But we can acknowledge that and say, okay, I can make a plan, I can change this, or it may be something that we can influence. So maybe I can't change it on my own, but maybe my friend, my family member can help me change it, and we can do that together, or I can influence it. Or maybe it's something that I can't control or influence. So how do I think about that? Is it something maybe I can't control now, or I can't influence now, maybe later in a couple months time I can, or maybe it's something I can never control. So what am I spending my time on? Am I spending my time on thinking about and worrying about things I can't control, or spending time on things that I can control and influence? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So focusing on, again, things we can't control, advocating for things we can influence, and accepting things that we can't control or influence. So we're going to look at these 6 pie pieces here and things we may be able to control or influence, so focusing on that today. So looking at acknowledging and understanding the function of stress, looking at what is causing our stress. Again, what is our inner control influence and what isn't. How do we balance the stress with what's going well? So there may be a lot of things that aren't going well, but there may be a lot of things that are. So how do we shift our focus to those things that are going well? How do we reduce our exposure to stress? How do we maintain our family and close relationships that we have that are really important? And how do we create predictability? So we'll go through each of these pieces. So the first one, acknowledging, right, and understanding the function of stress. So we know that stress is a natural response. We're all going to experience stress no matter how great we deal with it. And stress is really that evolutionary piece that has kept us alive for millions of years. So we're really looking at, if we go back to the cave people days, thinking about that saber-toothed tiger that jumps out at us. So what are we going to do? We're either we're gonna fight it if we think we can. We're gonna run away probably if we can't outrun it, or we might crawl up on the ball and hope that it just goes away. So thinking about that response, it's really important because it's going to keep us alive. Similar to today, maybe, is if we're on the sidewalk, we start to step out onto the road, we notice a car, we're going to quickly kind of go back. So really that stress response really helps us to stay alive and keep us well. So it's really important. There's lots of different types of stress too. So there's positive types of stress. So if we think going into the school year, we may have children or youth that are kind of stressed out about going to school, but we hope with our preparation, letting them know how things might be, looking at the routines, those kind of pieces, that they'll feel comfortable, they'll feel supported to kind of get through the first day of school and be able to go back the next day and feel okay about it. So they have that support from us to do it. So it's positive stress to get through it. It might be their first time on a bus, those kind of things. So again, it's stress that happens to all of us in life, but with supports, we're able to deal with it. We're able to cope and adapt and get through it. And we're okay. We learn from it. We say, hey, yeah, that kind of was stressful, but I was able to do it. Like my caregiver helped me through it. I got through it and I can go back now. And I know the next time I experience stress, that'll be okay. The other type of stress is tolerable. So this is stress that, again, we do those supports to help us through it, but it's more longer in duration, but we do know that it's going to end. So again, it might be thinking about, we know if I can get through this, work week myself, if my child can get through the school week, the weekend's going to be coming, holidays are going to be coming, summer vacation's going to be coming. So thinking about those times that we have that limited time period or that time period that's going to tell us, yes, this is going to end. When we talk about chronic and toxic stress, we know that we may not see an end in sight. So these may be stressors that we have in our life, thinking about abuse or thinking about something that may be kind of cumulative over time. So a stressor that keeps happening and happening and happening. And again, we don't see an end in sight and we don't really know what to do with it or cope or adapt. So also we need to kind of think about everyone's different and we all experience stress in different ways. And many of us will respond to stress initially, kind of have our moments, talk it through. And some of us may not even talk about the stress we experience right away. It may not come up for weeks or months later. Or there may be that moment that we just have that ordinary moment, the thing that is, is the tipping point all of a sudden that, we add on an extra stressor and we're just like, okay, yeah, now I'm done. And it's not even about that little thing, but it's a thing that kind of set us off to kind of say, yeah, the stress is really bothering me. I'm not doing well. I need to kind of think about how to help myself and each other. We can be affected by stress of others. So we have our own personal stressors. So as individuals, we may have our own individual stress. We may have stress at work. We may have stress at home. But we also have people that we care for. So they may be experiencing stress or anxiety. We may have stress in our communities that we're thinking about. So again, all these stresses can kind of accumulate. So we're really thinking today about acknowledging that it's normal, and then thinking about how can we help it and what can we do to hopefully build our resiliency. So how deep is the mud? So these pups are telling us, it depends on who you ask, right? So one pup is pretty much covered in mud and the other one is a little bit. So we're all different, and that's really the message that we're trying to get across. Everyone experiences life differently. We all have our past experiences that we've had, our current ones, and any ones in the future, and we all go through things differently, and that's okay. But we just have to acknowledge that and kind of say, okay, I've had a lot of stressors happening right now. I need some extra support, and that's okay. And someone else may experience, the same stress next to us. And we're like, wow, they're doing really well, but they may have different things that they kind of figured out, supports and so on. So again, it's okay. Whatever you're experiencing is okay. So the next piece is understanding what is causing the stress and assess what's in your control and what's not, again, and try to reduce that. So as we talked about, looking at the different types of stress. So if we take our stressors and say, okay, this one's a positive stress. Is that in my control? Is it not? Do we have a tolerable stress? Again, looking at that, and chronic stress, and kind of saying, is it worth my time working on it? Is it something I even want to work on? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a focus that, I'm just not ready. I got enough on my plate. Today's not the day to do that. I'm going to take on this stressor and try to make a plan for it. So again, looking at it from those categories can help, and also looking at it from what we control can also help us to kind of figure it out. And acceptance. So that's a big thing. So it says here, acceptance is a simple recognition of the truth that this is the way things are in the moment. And sometimes acceptance is hard. There are a lot of things that are happening in our world right now that are hard to accept. But it's really thinking about it and saying, okay, we're all, again, humanity is kind of going through this, and we need to accept it in order to kind of deal with it and try to find help. So what does help when we're stressed? So really looking at monitoring things like body cues. So do you know when you get stressed? So for me, when I think about when I get stressed, so I might talk faster, I might start to get red in the face, I might start to experience more headaches. So over time, I may start getting headaches more and more, and that's a cue for me to kind of say, okay, there's obviously something going on here. I'm experiencing more stress. Like, what is that? And kind of then take, again, go through my stressors and kind of see what they are. So looking at your body cues, what does your body tell you? Because usually you do have kind of earlier warning signs that you're starting to get stressed, and being aware of those. Because a lot of times we're just going through the day-to-day motions and we're not really thinking about that, but sometimes that can help us to kind of recognize it early and intervene and help earlier. So what healthy coping strategies have worked for me in the past? So depending on what my stressor is, sometimes for me, I will talk to friends or loved ones, and that sometimes helps me. And sometimes I don't want to talk to anybody. And sometimes I just want to watch, TV, or I want to go to the beach, have a walk on the beach, or go out in nature. So those are things that have helped me in the past. And some coping strategies may work for different situations. So it's really taking a look to say what works in what situation, and how does that help and how doesn't it, and trying it. So I know for me, some things that I've tried, like mindfulness for me worked. So once I first did it, I didn't know how to do it. So it didn't help as much in the beginning. And now I'm a bit better at it and learning it. So now that's something that I did, that I tried, that works for me. So again, trying it and feeling that it's okay to try it. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay. It doesn't work. And looking at unhelpful thoughts. So thinking about if there's a lot of negative thoughts coming through, and are they helpful? Does that help me to kind of get through the day to deal with my stress? And if it doesn't, trying to replace those with helpful thoughts. And the same thing with unhelpful coping strategies. So if there's certain things that, for instance, when I go home after a stressful day, if every day I'm getting that ice cream, that might be really good in the moment, but it might not be good over a long period of time, right? So thinking about different things that you may do that may help you, but maybe over time, it's not kind of the best thing to go to every single time. And thinking about people that can help. So thinking about who in your family, who at your work can help you, who do you feel that is that safe person that you can talk to. And it may not be those 1,000 people on your social media, but it may be, 2 people, 10 people, whatever that is for you that you feel you can help. And different people may help in different situations, just like your strategies may help in different situations. So if it's a situation about work, maybe a coworker you might approach. If it's a family situation, there might be somebody in your family that understands the situation more. So really looking at, again, what are those situations, who do you have access to support you, and what's the best fit for you. And then looking at professional people or services you can access to get help. So this may be, your own personal therapist. It may be your family doctor. It may be someone who, clergy, someone that you want to talk to that you feel has that professional lens that can also help you. So really looking at, again, it's really taking almost like a proactive approach when you're calm, cool, and collected, and kind of going through these and saying, okay, what do I do? Because a lot of times we don't take the time to kind of sit down. We might be looking at others and seeing what they're doing, but we don't often take the time to say, how am I doing, right? Like, I'm just kind of going through the motions here day to day, really stepping back and saying, how am I doing? And that I mean enough to do this. I'm valuable. I need to do this to take care of myself and everyone else. So looking at this and trying to figure out what works for you. Another big thing that you can do is movement. So really looking at when you're stressed out, kind of, again, moving, whether it's giving yourself a shake, going for a run, whatever it is. And I know depending on your kind of schedules between family responsibilities and work responsibilities, kind of looking at how you can kind of put that in there. We know also from research that turning up the corners of your mouth, even though it might seem awkward if we kind of smile even when we don't want to, it kind of gives your brain that sense of like, okay, like, I'll start to release some endorphins. I'm going to start to feel a bit happier. So that can kind of help us out. And dancing, you can dance now. I can't see you. It's all good. You can dance, you can stretch, walk, take the stairs, whatever it does to kind of get your body kind of moving, regulated. And oftentimes when we're moving, if you think of doing a sport or being outside in nature, we're often just focused on that, right? So we're not focused on kind of the stressors, those kind of things. So it gives our body and our brain an opportunity to kind of relax and kind of be in that moment and just be present. So the other piece is it's okay to take a break. And that may look different for all of us. So we may have more times in our day to take a break or less, but really acknowledging and asking for help and saying, I need a break, right? And not needing, it's okay to ask for a break when you're at your brink, but it's also great to kind of say ahead of time, like, I notice my body cues. I'm kind of getting stressed out. I'm getting more headaches. I'm a bit more reactive. I'm not the person I want to be lately, and kind of saying, okay, I need a break and reaching out for help. And that's okay, right? We all need breaks. We all need help, and it's okay to ask for it. So just really um, acknowledging that you're able to do that and feel guilt-free about it, right? Because there's no guilt in taking a break and taking care of yourself and valuing other people to be the best that you can be. Another strategy that you can do is looking at mindfulness. So it could be, taking mindfulness courses. There's a lot online now that are available, some of them for free. It could be just as this person in this horse, the person is thinking of everything, I think they have money there, thinking of bills, maybe their car repairs, what they're eating for supper, what they're doing. And the horse is like, I'm looking at the sun, I'm looking at the trees, I'm just looking at what's in front of me and I'm taking it in. And we all wish we could be the horse, right? And kind of do that. So it's kind of just being present in the moment that we're in, trying to not think about the future or the past or what we're thinking about in the future, just really thinking about now and trying to be present in that. So the more we can do that, again, that helps to regulate ourselves, our bodies, our minds, and it helps us to be in the present moment and to reduce, again, those stress hormones. So another thing that we can do if we have time and we're in the moment and we start to feel ourselves getting stressed is a 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. So what this grounding technique is we start to think about our senses. And again, it's making us more present in the moment and focusing on something other than the stressful event that we may be thinking about, or something that's in our mind that we don't really want to be thinking about. So we can do this about thinking about 5 things that you can see. So even now, just where you're sitting, even just look around where you're at. What are 5 things that you can see? So maybe a chair, maybe a plant, maybe you can see outside the window. Maybe it's a light, a pet, a person sitting next to you, whatever that is. So what are 4 things that you can touch? So maybe it's, the fabric on your chair, your couch, your kitchen table. Maybe it's that pet that's sitting next to you. What are 4 things that you can touch? What are 3 things that you can hear? So can you hear a fan in the background? Can you hear maybe some cars are outside? Maybe you can hear somebody talking. You can hear my voice. So what are 3 things that you can hear? What are 2 things you can smell? So maybe you have a coffee sitting next to you. Maybe somebody's baking. That'd be awesome. Maybe there's different things that you can kind of smell kind of in your space. Maybe there's a candle next to you. What are some things that you can smell? And one thing you can taste. So maybe you did have that coffee earlier, or a piece of gum, or whatever that may be. So just thinking of something you can taste. So that is a grounding technique. So really, again, thinking about that and thinking in times that you can do that to kind of bring yourself back to the present moment. And you can do that anywhere. The next one is you can do it anytime too, but it's if maybe you don't have as much time, or maybe you're in a situation where you have other people around you and you don't really want to be saying, oh, I'm seeing this, I'm hearing this, I'm touching this, I'm feeling this. But it's called box breathing. So it's a really quick thing, again, to kind of do to kind of reset, to focus on your breathing, where you're at. So what we're going to do is I'll just take you through it. So you're going to breathe in. So take a deep breath in, and we're going to count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4. And try to hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see that the more you practice it, the easier that it gets. But again, it's something quick that you can do, and you're just kind of doing that in your head. Like I did the counting out loud so we could learn it, but you're just counting in your head. So again, you can take a moment wherever you're at, if that's home, in the bathroom, at work, wherever you need to go, and just kind of do that and kind of recenter yourself and kind of, again, get in that moment, the present moment. The walk, talk, and flush is another thing. So we talked about physical activity, moving your body, how important that is. The other thing is drinking water. So drinking water actually flushes out any stress hormones that you have. So it's really good to do that. So the combination of you walking with somebody. So if a stressful event happens and you're able to walk with somebody and get that support and break for a moment, even if it's just for a few minutes, if you're able to go for a walk with somebody, drink some water, and then also talk to them about what happened. So again, talking to them, kind of saying, this happened, this was upsetting for me, and just processing that and walking and drinking the water kind of helps your body to regulate again. So that's another thing to kind of do that is known through research and our friends through the Tent Academy. Another thing to do is if you are working or if you need transitions through different parts of your day. The example we will use is coming from work to home. So really thinking about how do you transition from work to home. So if you had a really stressful day at work and you're going home and your family, your children, your pets are there, how do you kind of get out of that zone and be present with your loved ones? So really thinking about, is there a way, sometimes I will blast music in the radio, very loud music. I've had times that some people in the cars, if it is radio, they will also start singing along with me. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, just whatever it is to kind of get you in a different zone, right? So if it's, again, blasting the music, if it's when I go home, I actually change my clothes. So if I'm physically at work in the day, I will go home if I can, if I have time, I'll ideally take a shower and then I'll change my clothes, and then it's kind of, I'm in a different zone. So I'm not Holly Murphy, the person who works at the IWK. I'm in this moment, I'm mom and I'm whoever, right? So looking at how to kind of do that and not feeling guilty about it. So we talked about guilt before. So we had a story of a coworker who lives next door to somebody. And they said, oh, let's carpool together. Like, let's go. We're going to drive together. It's going to be great. We'll get to talk about everything. And the person actually sent the email about that and they didn't respond. And then they saw the person's partner and she said to them, like, he does not want a carpool because when he comes home, he has 3 children. He has this he has to do. The only time he gets alone is in the car, right? So looking at, again, being okay with saying that, like, the only time I get alone is in the car. So I need that time for myself. And I don't want to be talking about work while I'm on my way home, because I want to transition. So again, knowing what's right for you, and maybe what's right for you is going in the car with that person and both of you want to talk and debrief about it, and that's okay too, right? So just kind of knowing what you feel is good for you and what transition practices you have. And again, it's just taking it from kind of one context to another and kind of having that transition point to kind of help you, get from one zone to the next. The other thing that we know is helpful is practicing gratitude. So we mentioned a lot of times we may be focused kind of on the stress and negative things that are happening, but what we also know is that the more we can focus on the positive things that are happening, the more we'll see positive things happening. So that's really important. So the more we start kind of noticing, like, hey, this is going really well at home with my partner, with my child. We had a really fun day this day, or I'm really grateful today that this happened. We start to notice that more and actually feel better about it and have kind of increased, self-confidence, increased mood. So really thinking about ways in our day, whether it's when we get up in the morning, saying 3 things you're grateful for, at bedtime, saying the same thing, whatever way works for you to kind of consciously really be thinking of that and set an intention for the day. The other really big piece that we want to get across is self-compassion. So self-compassion is really looking at these 3 components. So self-kindness. So are we being kind to ourselves? Are we being loving towards ourselves instead of critical? Knowing that we are human, we're a part of a common humanity. Everyone suffers, and we're not alone in that. Everyone is going to suffer, and nobody's perfect, but we're not alone. And mindfulness. So again, being mindful of that, accepting it and saying, you know what, this is hard. I'm going to really think about that, feel that, and let that sit and accept it without judgment or overreacting. And the way I like to think about it is thinking about, what would I tell my best friend? So if I wouldn't, say to my best friend, what are you doing? That's ridiculous. Oh, how did you do that? I don't know how you ever decided to do that, whatever it is. I wouldn't say that, right, to my best friend. So I shouldn't say it to myself, right? So that's what I always kind of think of now when I'm thinking about self-compassion is, if I wouldn't say it to someone else or my friend, I'm not going to say it to myself. So that's kind of a good way to remember it. So next, Prasanna is going to take us through the next pie piece, looking at balancing stress and focusing on what's going well.
Thanks, Holly. So I'd like to take the rest of the time taking you through, you folks through the rest of the considerations that Holly presented in a full diagram before. So right now we're looking at balancing stress by focusing on what's going well. So we put the slide up, created a slide literally using a balance beam just to make the point that, stress is going to happen. So Holly talked about that, right? So it's natural. We're supposed to feel stress, but depending on the type of stress you're feeling, so if it's tolerable or chronic, or if it's an intense emotional reaction to even a smaller type of stress, then we need to have some strategies to settle ourselves. So Holly took you through a great list of strategies that you could try in the moment, and I'm sure you have some other strategies that may have worked for you as well. But with this idea of balancing stress with what's going well, what we want you to think about is a slide Holly had on gratitude and acceptance, right? So if you're feeling like, right, this is overwhelming, the stress isn't going away, take a pause, take a moment to breathe. So you can use the strategy that Holly talked about. So start with the box breathing and or the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding strategy. And then you can remind yourself about, right, despite everything that's happening, despite all the things that are not in my control, what is in my control and what is actually going well. So these are just some examples that we put together. So it could be your own health. It could be the fact that you live in a safe environment, whether it's in your own home or the people that you live with, or even the environment that's outside of your home. It could be your family, right? So for family, I don't want you to think about your biological family. It could be whoever you consider family, right? Or a loved one that's close to you. Being able to get outside in nature. And that may not be possible for everybody, especially if you have young children or multiple caregiving responsibilities. And when we're talking about caregiving, I also want to acknowledge that it may not be young children or adolescents that you are taking care of. It could also be people of various different ages for multiple different reasons. Right? Despite all of that, we may want to remind ourselves, right, I do actually have the ability when there is a break, when there is some time to get outside. I know the picture looks beautiful. It's this person with their dog looking off into some sort of a fjord or something. It doesn't have to be that picturesque. If you can, lovely. If not, even getting outside of your home is a great thing to do. And reminding yourself about your spirituality and whatever that means, right? If it's religious based, if it's not, if it's mindfulness based, or whatever you want to remind yourself about in terms of who you are as a person and what goes into making you who you are. The next thing we want to talk about in terms of things to consider for strategies is to assess the amount of stress you're exposed to that you can't avoid, right? So there may be some stressors that are well in your control that you can manage. And when you're thinking about the stressors you can manage, I want you to think of stressors that you can either walk away from or make a plan to avoid, right? So there may be some stressors like looking after your kids, going to work, answering phone calls from your family members, so on and so forth that you can't really avoid. But outside of that, there may be lots of things that are in your control that you can get rid of, right? So these are just, again, some examples. And at the top of the list is social media or any type of electronic usage. And the reason we start with that is because anytime you're looking at a screen, like you're right now, our brain gets activated, right? So anytime you're awake or from the time you wake up and your eyes are open and you're conscious, the brain is receiving stimuli and information. And, so we need to get through the day. We can't walk around with our eyes closed. We need our senses to work for us. And the recognition then is if the brain's already activated, well, can we take away use of electronics, right? So yes, check your phone for a text. If it's not something you need to dwell on, put it away. Or maybe if it's a response that's going to take a little bit of time, maybe think about a time that you can do that other than in the moment. Watching TV. So if you do have children, other people that you care for, TV and electronic usage may be part of your daily plan. I remember when my children were younger, that was absolutely part of the daily plan because you can't program children and other people to do physical activity every single minute of the day. So if you are having to use electronic time, just be mindful of what it is and what you're actually watching. right? So for yourself, if you are having to watch electronic device on your own, so now I'm not talking about with your children or other people you care for, on your own, pardon me, think about, is this something I need to watch, right? So if it's the news, think, well, did I already hear this piece of news? And has something changed since the last time I heard this news? If you watched news on the TV, do I need to then see my Facebook update or other social media updates as well? So it's just a matter of thinking about, right, if I already have the knowledge, do I need to expose myself to additional electronic time? In terms of news, so right now there's lots and lots of guidelines that are coming out. There's lots of changing guidelines that are coming out as well. So we do want to be informed, right? So we want to keep ourselves safe and stay informed. And when you're thinking about checking for updates and getting um, legitimate information, I'll also encourage you to go to one source of information, right? So that could be the Department of Public Health, provincial COVID update site if you want to know about what's happening with the pandemic and whether you're supposed to wear a mask or not, so on and so forth. If you're thinking about your children or youth or yourself going back to school or having to support somebody who's going back to school, then you can think about going to the Department of Education and Early Childhood Education website to see, right, what are their guidelines on how to manage entrance and exit into classrooms and so on and so forth. So the idea is, please stay informed, but think about the amount of time you spend taking on additional bits of information that may not be that helpful. Talking with family and loved ones, friends about things that are not in your control. So I have 4 adult children. I have lots of family members and people that I love. And I know you folks hopefully will get what I'm talking about, which is, so we do want to stay engaged with people. And I'll talk about the importance of relationships in a few minutes. And the additional piece to that is, as you're interacting with your loved ones and family members, is to think about, what is the conversation about? Is there a point to the conversation, or are we just having fun and sharing information? But if the conversation itself is causing stress, or you're getting that uneasy feeling in your body that it's not going the way you wanted it to, or the person who you're talking with isn't doing well based on the reaction you see in their face, then I want you to think about controlling that conversation as well. So when I say control, I don't mean put your hand up and ask them to stop talking. I'm talking about making a plan in terms of being able to guide the conversation into a more positive topic, or depending on what the topic of conversation is, maybe thinking in your head about how to guide the conversation so that it can end and you can leave. Right? But the takeaway is that even while you're talking with your children, other people you care for, or your family members and friends and family, is to monitor the quality or the topic of conversation as well. The same thing goes for relationships. So with conversations, I'm sure you talk to lots of people through the day. With relationships, that's something else you're going to think about is, yes, we need relationships. We need people in our lives. So the invitation is to think about, right, when I interact with this person, are they helpful most of the time? And if the answer is not really, you may want to think about, right, what are the positive outcomes of this relationship for me, right? So I'm not asking you to stop talking to friends and family because sometimes we don't have the option to do that. And it goes back to that idea of what's in your control, right? So even when you're thinking about your relationships, whether at home, in your personal life, or at work, is to think about, right, do I need this relationship? And if I need to end it, is that in my control? And if not, can I make a plan, seek help, so on and so forth. The next slide is actually talking specifically about this idea of relationships. So here we're saying maintain family and close relationships in a safe way while following public health guidelines. So again, I'll go back to what we said earlier, that family is whatever you describe or identify as who those people are. It doesn't have to be a biological family. It doesn't have to be certain types of people. It's whoever you feel comfortable that you consider a family. And that could be children, adolescents, could be your parents, your siblings, friends, acquaintances, so on and so forth. And then if you think about the last section I talked about, Even within the context of relationships, I want you to monitor the quality of those relationships. And when you're thinking about relationships and engagement, we have a few furry friends there. So ideally, especially if you're not doing well or you're dysregulated, our brain feels much better if we can connect with another person. And if you don't have another person to connect with and you have a pet, that's just as calming in the absence of a person, right? So person's the first choice, and if you happen to have a pet or you have access to an animal or a pet, that will also help your brain to regulate and settle. The next section is talking about creating predictability. So the reason we want to think about creating predictability is because when we think about our brain and the way it functions, it's always assessing our environment to see if there's anything that can kill us, right? So we may not be thinking about it that way in 2020, but Holly talked about those early days of human evolution where we did have to think about, is something going to eat me and kill me, right? And I'm not going to pretend that everybody is perfectly safe. So I know there's lots of people out there, even in 2020, that are living in unsafe environments. It doesn't have to cause death. So I want to acknowledge that and make sure I recognize that. I'm not saying everybody's safe. But what I do want to say is that even if you're not experiencing immediate, imminent, risky situations, your brain's always scanning the environment to see, right, is there something that can kill me? And if there isn't something that's going to kill you, then the brain takes a bit of a breather, and then now it starts to look for things that might hurt you or that might cause you psychological injury. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that your brain's always working to keep you safe. And so what we want to do is to help the brain out by making sure it knows what's coming next, right? So if you're going into an unfamiliar situation, so it's the first time you're going to a mall, let's say, right? So you need to buy some school supplies, or you need to get some new shoes, or whatever it is, and you're not really sure what the specific COVID rules are for that store, then what we want to do is to think about, what do I already know about operating in a pandemic, right? So what we know is, right, get a mask, put a mask on, or at least have a mask. And then beyond that, if you don't know what the superstore is going to make you do versus Walmart, that's okay. So that's that acceptance that Holly talked about, right? So what we want you to do then is to think about, okay, plan for the uncertainty, but absolutely make sure you control as much as possible what you already know about those guidelines. So that was just an example around creating predictability. So here, the other thing to draw your attention to is, I'd say, is predictability can, in quotes, because what we know is that you can have the best plan possible, and then the plan falls apart, not because it's your fault, but just because there are other circumstances or situations that came along. So we're not saying just because you make a plan, you're going to be stress-free. What we're saying is making a plan and thinking ahead about what might happen will absolutely help your brain. The other thing to consider when you're thinking about planning ahead is to intentionally and deliberately plan things out. And when you're thinking about your own stress level and wellness, something that I'll encourage you to do is to actually schedule time in for yourself. Right? So I had to do that when my own children were younger, and I was juggling my family and work, and I was in school for part of that time period as well. And really, if I thought about myself, there really wasn't any time in 24 hours of the day for me to take care of myself until I had to. And then all of a sudden, right, I prioritized my health, my lifestyle, so on and so forth, because I had to. So what we're hoping you'll consider is, before you get to the point where you have to make changes, is to start thinking about maybe scheduling in even 5 minutes of your day, whether it's before your children get up, before another person that you're caring for wakes up, or after they go to sleep, that you can focus just on yourself. And if you are a caregiver, I know that's going to be hard, right? So when I think back to my days, as I said, when I had young children, it was really hard not to think about what their needs are, what my partner's needs are, what my work needs are. But that's the challenge, right? The challenge is to make time by scheduling it in, if possible. The other things I already talked about in terms of, right, if you've been to Superstore, you know those rules, and now you're going into a Walmart, you don't know those rules. What you know for sure is there are going to be some sort of rules, right, or guidelines. So plan for that uncertainty. So we really like this code, which is uncertainty is the only certainty, right? So if you don't know something, at least you know that amount, right? You know that you don't know that piece of information, so you can make a plan around it. So we've been using the word plan quite a bit. So what we're going to do next is to take you through some strategies and give you some guidance on creating a plan for yourself that may work for you. So again, I'm intentionally using that word may for a couple of reasons. One is you may not need any of this. You might be like, I've got this, it's not a big deal. And then maybe others of you that are listening to this session going, none of the strategies you've talked about work for me. Right? So you want to acknowledge that and say that you're smart, bright people, and what we want you to do is start with what you know works for you, right? So that's the most important thing. What works for you, and then start building from there. So if you're thinking about what works for you, the first thing to think about is, so go back to what Holly talked about earlier, which is what are you grateful for? And then we've broken it down by in your personal life and in your work life. And the other column is looking at things that bring me joy. So there is a difference between what you're grateful for and things that bring you joy. And the best way that I found to explain what joy is, it's not the meaning of the word joy or things that bring me joy, but I want you to remember a time when you were so happy and joyful and try to remember what that internal feeling was like. Right? And if you do have young children or you've been around young children, I want you to picture a toddler that's so excited that they're literally shaking, their skin's color may be changing, and they're buzzing, they're literally buzzing, and they might start dancing and jumping. So I want you to think back to your toddler days, if you can, or even the last time you felt true joy, and think it's not right when I ate my favorite ice cream, I was happy. I want you to think about that internal feeling of being happy and joyful. The grid on the bottom is talking about getting you to think about some things that, again, right? So Holly went through these items already, and the reason we want to go back to it is to get you to think about, who the people are that can help you. What are your body cues when you start to get happy, sad, mad? So think about what happens to your body first, what happens just before you get to that most dysregulated state, whether it's positive or negative, and then what helps you to become regulated or to settle down or feel calm when you reach a certain point. In the bottom row, it's also talking about professional people and services I can access to get help. So that doesn't mean just a nurse practitioner or a walk-in clinic or a doctor all the time, unless that's what's needed, right? So I know you know what your needs are, so you'll have to match your needs with an appropriate care provider. But when you're talking about professional people, I also want you to think about other people that you might not think of as a professional caregiver, right? So people in religious communities, people in sporting communities, could be people who actually, school staff, right? So people may not really think of school staff as therapists or healthcare providers, but what school staff know are, behaviors of your child or your youth, or they do get to know the child and the youth as well, right? So not to the same degree of expertise as you, because you're their primary caregiver, but that's the idea, is to think of who else can I talk to get information, whether it's about my child or for myself, right? Other than thinking about just doctor, lawyer, those types of professionals. The next thing to consider is when you're looking at all of these strategies and thinking about, right, what do I do first? When do I do it? Is to break it down into small chunks of time. And one way to do that is to think about a stressor, right? So a stressor for me coming into work today was to plan ahead to think about, right, so I haven't come into this physical space for a couple of weeks, and things have changed in the public domain, right? So the rules around bubbles have changed, the rules around who can do what and go where have changed. So part of the planning I had to do was to literally think about, what time do I need to leave home today to make sure I get here on time? Right? For some of you out there, you could also be thinking about, right, I need to make a plan for the week, right? So the stressor could be I need to get through the first week, not just the 20, 30 minutes of driving to get somewhere. It could also be thinking about, right, where do I go to get information about whatever it is? Or if you're having to venture out of your living space to go shopping, thinking about, right, do I need a plan to get through those uncertain scenarios of mask, no mask, how many people that can go in with me to the store, hospital, so on and so forth. So the point is, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a very small thing, and the duration of time also doesn't have to be big. It can be small chunks of time. So think about it in terms of what can you do before the stressor comes along or starts? What can you do during the stressor? So while you're in it, to stay regulated, to make sure that you can be your best self. And then after that event is over, what are some things you can do in the moment and plan ahead so that you don't have to think about, oh no, so that just happened, now what, right? So something, I want to go back to something I said earlier, which is you can make the best possible plan, and that might not work at all, right? So if you do the before, you plan for the during, and then as you're going through the during, it falls apart, not a problem, because I know you're going to have the ability to kind of, roll with it and do what you need to do. And so when you get to the after part, what that means is you're saying, okay, well, I need to tweak the plan. I need to try some different strategies. Or maybe what you do at that point is acceptance, right? To say, I planned for every possible outcome and it still happened. And that's okay, because we can't control everything. So in terms of putting things down on paper, Holly talked about it a little bit earlier, and then I talked about it as well. So put down things that you're good at, your body cues, people that can help you, things that have worked for you in the past. And the idea with this grid is the gray column, so the one on the far left, says potential stressors. Right? So this is where you can list, remember, it can be small stressors, big stressors, time-dependent stressors or not. And then in the pink column, think about how you can prepare for it. In the blue column, think of what things you can do in the moment as you're going through that event. And in the green column, on the last column, you're going to think about things you can do for yourself after that event is over. And when you're populating that grid, if you decide to do this, some people say, oh, I've got this, I don't need to write it down on paper, and that's totally okay. But regardless of how you structure this, the main thing is whatever you put in each of those columns and each of those boxes have to be in your control. Right? Because if you pick something that's not in your control, then even in this planning phase, you may start to experience an additional stress. Right? So make sure it's always in your control. The other thing I want to mention here is that when you're planning, so I don't know about you folks, it definitely happens to me at times, is that I can get caught up in the planning itself, right? And then I start worrying about, oh no, I need to find the time for the bus. And then I start thinking about, right, but I need to buy a bus pass. Right, where can I buy a bus pass? So there may be multiple different trajectories that your mind goes in. And if that starts to happen, you can go back to some of the strategies Holly talked about, which is the box breathing, right? So counting in sets of 4. You can think about the grounding techniques, so the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can do some visualization, mindfulness to bring yourself back to the here and now. And then think, right, there are all those unknowns, but right now I just need to plan my bus route, right? So that's an example, hopefully that makes sense, just to make the point that for some people, even planning may be stressful, right? And that's not the intention here. We don't want to stress you out with the planning. What we want to do is to give you a structure to hopefully make it easy. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to do is to give you a summary of some of the things that Holly's already talked about. But it's just kind of chunked up into the 3. So, before, during, and after, starting with, refer to your personal strategies. So that's what works for you, what causes you stress, who are your go-to people, who are the professional people, so on and so forth. Scheduling social time. So if you're thinking about even your child or youth going back to school, or maybe you going back to work yourself, is to think about, right, I need to plan some time to connect with people, right? So if you are caring for people, whether it's children, youth, or adults, that's social engagement, right? But what I'm talking about is, again, that quality, right? So it's not that, your children and the adults you might be caring for, that you don't have quality relationships, but I want you to think about setting aside some time for you to have a calming conversation or a fun conversation that has nothing to do with caregiving or workplace guidelines, or the stress of remembering so many sanitization rules, or so on and so forth from public health. You see here, identify at least one thing that brings you joy and you're grateful for, and scheduling time for physical activity in nature after your day. So if you're in a caregiving role, that may be difficult, right? So in terms of creating time for physical activity, so ideally it's in nature, but if you have to be at home because you have children and you can't leave them alone, or you're caring for another person and you can't leave them alone, think about things you can do even in your living space, right? So maybe it's a matter of, if you're comfortable, finding a video and dancing along to it, finding a video, doing some yoga to it, along with it. Or it could just be intentionally or purposefully doing some physical activity rather than just resting and relaxing. And then always going back to the default, which is, if you need rest and relaxation in that moment, prioritize that. But ideally, we want to make sure that we're moving our bodies. Breathing intentionally and deeply. So yes, we're breathing all the time, but what we want to be doing is thinking about that box breathing, or making sure that we're breathing fully so that our diaphragm moves and our lungs get full of air. In terms of Drings, we talked about a lot of these already. The only thing that I want to draw attention to that Holly talked about is drinking water whenever possible. And this may be something that you may need to schedule, right? So making sure you have a bottle of water or something you can put water in, so you don't have to worry about buying a drink or going into a store and worrying about touching things and so on and so forth. And Holly talked about the importance of drinking water and flushing those toxins out of your body. Practice mindfulness and be forgiving. And at the end of the activity is to go back to the plan, right? So you're evaluating the plan, seeing if it needs to change. But even if the plan went according to the way you had intended, is to then still think about, okay, that was great. So now I need to file it away, literally in your pocket or in your mind, to say, if that stressor comes out again, now that this worked, I can use those strategies again. Breathing, so there's a lot of cues to breathe, because that's one of the fundamental ways that we can settle our brains, ground ourselves, so that we can think clearly. And then towards the middle there, it says, depending on the day, give yourself a break and take it easy. So sure, you don't need to be told how to do that, but I know when, again, so when my children were younger, there were days when I was feeling like, okay, there's not enough time in the day, I need to get 5 things done. And then when I actually stopped to think about it, those things really didn't need to get done, right? So if you're feeling really dysregulated or stressed out, think, even if you have made a plan, think, do I really need to do that? Can I call and cancel, let's say, a walk with your friend, right? So after I said, socialize, think maybe right today is not the time to connect with a friend and go for a walk, right? So the idea is, even if you've made a plan, assess the plan in an ongoing way and make sure that you're taking it easy on yourself. So in terms of wrapping things up, I just want to draw your attention to some key messages. The first is starting with you and thinking about the fact that we're all human beings, which means we're all going to experience stress, and because we're human beings, we're bound to experience suffering, right? So stress and suffering they're on a continuum, but if you're thinking about humanity, as Holly said, we know human beings experience suffering, so we want to be focusing on is acceptance. So when I say acceptance, you don't have to like it, you just need to acknowledge it and say, right, this is what I'm going through right now, and be okay with that. And then go to self-kindness, self-love, self-compassion, saying, right, this really sucks, that's okay. This is awful, that's okay, because regardless of the feeling that you have, whether it's emotionally or physically, that is the right thing for you to feel, right? So don't ever feel guilty about what you're feeling or you're thinking, and that's an example of being self-compassionate, right? Is acceptance and saying, I shouldn't think about this, and it's okay if I'm thinking about it right now. And then after you take a mindful approach to it in terms of acceptance, is to then start evaluating if the stressor is actually something that you can control, right? So Holly talked about, do you have time to deal with this stressor? Do you have the energy to deal with this stressor? And if the answer is yes, yes, then thinking about, okay, is this stressor actually in my control? Or is it not? And then if it's not, accept it and then moving on. If it is something that you can control and you're thinking, yep, I think I can make a plan, but I'm not sure how it's going to go, that's when you can think about going to those grids, thinking about mapping things out. And the last little graphic there is there to remind you to think about chunking things up. And remember, when I say chunking, it can be 5-minute stressor that you anticipate or you know might be coming, or it could be a day-long stressor, it could be a week-long stressor. But the idea is it doesn't have to be a broad, overarching goal. In terms of resources, so there's lots and lots of self-care resources out there. And what I'll get you to do is, unless you have a well-established list of strategies that work for you, is to think of things that work for you, right? So you can Google stuff, you can buy books, you can get self-help strategies, worksheets. There are so many things out there, but the biggest thing is to make sure it works for you. So because there's so much information out there, we didn't want to give you just a screen full of resources, because we know there's an endless number of strategies that work for different people. However, in terms of giving you a central place to go to, so the first website is the Nova Scotia Health Authority's public website. And so that has information in terms of health and healthcare. So we thought, okay, we'll give you that website at least, because we're presenting this session in the context of wellness and from a perspective of Department of Health. The second website is actually a web page from the main website around stress. So that website or web page has some strategies that Holly and I would have already talked about, as well as some adult-specific resources and self-help tools that may be helpful. So I'm not saying it will be, but it may be helpful. And if you do have any questions, or if you're wondering, are there any strategies or things I can think for my child or you, then there's the IWK public website as well. And for those of you that are interested, the second half of the slide gives you some of the references from where Holly and I got the information to put this session together. So that's the end of the session. So I'd just like to invite Holly back up as well, just to end things off. So as we said, the topic was resiliency and wellness in uncertain times. And we know that there's a lot of uncertainty for all of us, not just caregivers, but for all of us. But we do want to thank you for being a caregiver, acknowledge that you're doing a great job already, and wish you all the best.